Welcome to the first episode of Techs of the Roundtable. I completely did not forget to mention this in my intro in the video podcast. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you are chiming in to listen. My name is Anthony Scala. I'm Director of Cybersecurity Operations and vCISO for an IT company headquartered in my hometown, San Diego, California. And I'm joined today by a couple of colleagues, Pierce Boucher and Nick Soulos, who I'll let them introduce themselves here. So Pierce, why don't you give us a quick intro?
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much, Anthony. I'm Pierce. I'm an IT manager with a local IT services company, also headquartered in San Diego. I have about 10 years of experience in IT, and my specialty is infrastructure management and help desk management.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you. Nick?
Hey, my name is Nick. I've been in the industry just for a little over 2 years now, so still on the newer side. And I also work at an MSP. I'm currently working at a client that does property management right now all across the western side of the US. And for the past couple of years, I've been primarily focused on developing my security skills and handling more and more of the security facets of our team and just taking on all that stuff.
Nice. Yeah. Breaking into cyber. That is definitely a big topic right now and something we're going to hit a little bit later in the show. But to get started, we're going to really start with a couple of tech stories that we were interested in talking about today. I think, Nick, you had the first one here, right?
I did. And this is something that, probably a lot of other IT professionals are either currently dealing with or going to be dealing with shortly, and that is the Windows 11 upgrade. We've all got the clock ticking right now down on Windows 10, not too long left. So, word of advice for anybody out there who hasn't started yet, I would suggest giving yourself way more time than you think you need, just because you're always going to run into little hiccups here and there, things that you didn't expect or couldn't have expected. And one of those road bumps that we've been running into at our site is basically dealing with upgrading older endpoints. Typically, we've been seeing this with ones that are above 3 years in age. And it's that when we've pushed out the upgrade via GPO, a lot of them are just bricking and they're getting stuck in a boot loop. We're not able to have the on-site team be able to, access that Windows startup recovery screen at all, even. So they're essentially getting bricked, and we're having to get these endpoints sent into us to completely wipe and re-image them. So that's just been, a little slight pain point that we've come across, and something that hopefully we can help, other people avoid, because it's not very fun, especially when you're dealing with a fleet that is, dispersed over a wide area and a lot of different endpoints of varying ages and hardware.
Yeah, I know Windows 11, that is really starting to creep up on us. And so for anyone that doesn't know, October 14th, I think, October 14th or October 15th here, we're going to be hitting Windows 10 end of support, end of life. And that is when essentially these Windows 10 systems that we've been utilizing in enterprise environments for the past several years, they're going to stop receiving updates. They're going to stop receiving patches, including security patches from Microsoft. So as we pass this end of support, end of life date, all of these Windows 10 systems are going to start becoming vulnerabilities within these enterprise environments. So from the front lines, you're seeing these bricking issues with these older systems. Do we think that is a more of an element of Microsoft's patching? Is it planned obsolescence? Is it a lack of a refresh cycle or challenges with slow refresh cycles that you're anticipating? Where are we landing with the issues that we're seeing currently?
I'm not sure if I would say so much that it's planned obsolescence necessarily, but I do think that a lot of it is due to, when these computers were manufactured, there was never anything taken into consideration as far as, upgrading to a completely new OS down the line. So, they're purpose built to run Windows 10. They do that great, but with the new, demands and challenges that come with Windows 11, a lot of them simply can't handle it or can kind of barely handle it, and now they're just slowly creeping along where, before it was a completely serviceable endpoint without any issues. And also, a lot of these boot loop issues that we've been seeing are happening when there's not enough storage space on the drive. So it forces the upgrade, it pushes it, but there's not enough storage to actually install Windows 11 fully, which is what gets it stuck in that boot loop. It doesn't even get to the Windows screen. It's just flashes the manufacturer logo, dies, goes back, tries to do it again, and it gets stuck in that.
Yeah, the storage requirements. I mean, that's something that's always been a big piece of these kind of major upgrades. I remember seeing that when we were going Windows 7 to Windows 10. If you didn't have the ample storage on your primary drive, on your C drive, you're not even going to be able to download the update, much less implement, install it. And then also, what about the other resource constraints like RAM, CPU? Are you seeing a noticeable negative impact on the overall performance of systems that are upgraded to Windows 11, say from Windows 10?
Yeah, we've definitely noticed some impact in primarily older endpoints, but thankfully we've already for the past several years been in the process of upgrading the RAM of pretty much our entire fleet. So memory is not an issue for the most point, except for a few edge cases here and there. But the hardware constraints, do definitely come into play. And even for my own personal use, like my home computer, I found out the other day that is actually not eligible for Windows 11 at all because I don't have a TPM on my motherboard. So I'm going to have to be buying some new hardware for my own personal use within the next few months just to make sure that I can continue to keep a safe, home PC setup.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's crazy to hear. Motherboards coming without TPM at this point, in 2025. Now, Pierce, you've
Yes, sir.
managed both Windows 10 and Windows 11 environments. I believe you're actually taking an environment to Windows 11 currently, right?
Yep. Yeah, we have a lot of Windows 10 endpoints currently in our environment that we're currently planning a project to do the Windows 11 upgrade. But one thing that I was really thinking that whole time that we've been discussing this so far is this reminds me very much of the Windows 7 to Windows 10 upgrades. We had very similar issues at that time, but I would say it was even worse. The inline upgrade feature from 7 to 10 or 7 to 8.1 was not good. And we saw a lot of systems run into more issues after the upgrade, not as in boot loop issues necessarily, not quite to that extent, but there was a lot of performance problems at that time with newer machines. That's actually where fast startup came from, which you might know about, which is the for those that aren't aware, fast startup is Microsoft's answer for people complaining about slow startup times back when Windows 10 originally released. I think it was introduced in 16, I want to say. That the timeline might be a little bit off on that, but basically, a lot of the big complaint at the beginning that Windows 10 is very slow, and most of the reason was due to drive speed. It wasn't able to. It literally was trying to read all the operating system files from the drive and taking too long to do that, right? And so the startup process was very slow. And so what Microsoft did is they introduced Fast Startup, which basically disables shutdown. It turns into an extended hibernate mode. So there's less startup process that needs to happen on the machine. But another thing we saw kind of with the dawn of Windows 10 was people pushing pretty much the lowest spec machines they could that still would run the operating system. And I think that also contributed to the performance problems that we were seeing, is machines were just underspec across the board. So those are two things that I'm kind of thinking of through all this is, are machines spec'd high enough for Windows 11 because it has different operating system requirements, right? Or I'm sorry, it has different hardware requirements. But the other thing is we have to remember that the inline upgrade process is better now, right? I think the architecture of Windows is designed for it a little bit more these days, but compared to the Service Pack days, but there's still not really that. I don't really trust Microsoft, to put it plainly, to upgrade inline from 10 to 11. So our refresh process will probably include a lot of re-imaging instead of inline upgrades as a result of that.
Interesting. Yeah, a fresh install is going to be the cleanest install.
Always.
And a couple points on what you said. The fast startup, the bane of IT's existence since its inception.
It's
Convincing
crazy.
users that they've restarted their system every week for the last 6 weeks when their uptime is
shut down every Friday.
Yeah, exactly. So,
but it's not their fault, right? They don't know. No,
Mhm.
it's even a lot of IT professionals aren't aware of this setting either because they haven't encountered it or they haven't read about it or something like that, right? Through no faults of their own. So it's something that I hold very near and dear to my heart. It can be disabled if you use a Microsoft stack. It can be disabled with an Intune remediation. It can also be disabled via GPO if you're still on-prem. I don't think this is a Mac thing at all, so probably not relevant to that sphere of things. But in Windows, if you're running a home PC as well and you have an SSD, turn off fast startup. I won't get into exactly how to do it. It's in the power settings, but do a quick Google for how to disable fast startup and do yourself a favor.
Yeah, exactly. And you had actually talked about the disk speeds as well, which I thought was really interesting because when we were going from Windows 7 to Windows 10, that was really also the migration from hard drive to SSD as well. And so we saw a lot of impact there. Now we're in a kind of a different situation with Windows 11 where most systems have SSDs at this point, but also in enterprise environments, we've moved so far into cloud storage that drives in current modern systems, at least for a lot of the organizations that I've worked with, they're getting smaller, 128 gig, 256 gig storage because there's this reliance on cloud storage, which is a wonderful technology and has completely revolutionized the productivity in the modern era, essentially. So now we might see a little bit more impact where previously we relied so heavily on having a significant amount of mass storage locally on the system. Now we're in the spot where these updates, depending on the storage available on the system and the system use from the user, they may be too big to hit the drive itself because
Absolutely.
we just don't need the regular storage on our devices anymore. What do you guys think about that?
I think that's completely accurate, right? Because one thing that we do forget with cloud storage is like tools like OneDrive are great in the sense that they clean up unused files after a certain amount of time and things like that. They still provide the option for people to keep files saved locally, and people will save files locally, right? So that's I think that's one thing to keep in mind with that, right? I think that's a really good point overall, is that the drives are smaller, people are still using local storage. Maybe there's not enough, in many cases there may not be enough space for things like laptops specifically is one thing that I think of, that like drives and laptops on average 256, 512, like at max 1 terabyte laptop hard drives are not really that common in my experience. So anybody that is storing games or anything local excuse me, anything locally is gonna be impacted by that. So I think that's a great point.
And I would say a little caveat there as well, because I would say in enterprise environments, it is unusual to see laptops with large amounts of storage. I think more on the consumer side, you see the terabyte, 2 terabyte options a little bit more because at the same time, that cloud storage, sure, we have Google Drive, sure, we have personal OneDrive, but when you're in an organization or an enterprise environment, it's really deployed to you,
right,
versus
it's
when you're
enforced
on the consumer side.
Right.
Yeah. So I actually have a little bit of a different experience with Windows 11 and Windows 11 upgrades. So I've worked in an environment. I managed a team and an IT team for an organization, and we accidentally had an accidental push of Windows 11. So we used a patch management asset inventory tool, and one day, one of my employees was reviewing the patches that were available to approve them and push them out to the fleet, just normal patching operations here, and accidentally approved the Windows 11 patch. And all of a sudden, we started having systems restart into Windows 11. Now, in that time, luckily it was about a 100-person company. It was a little bit smaller, had a little bit more flexibility, and decided, well, we're going to need to go to Windows 11 anyway. We already have this start. Let's push through. Let's see how it happens. Now, we did have a lab environment in that at that organization that wasn't impacted, so I knew that the primary production environment was not going to be subjected to this surprise Windows 11 upgrade. We pushed it out, we monitor it, and I actually didn't encounter almost any problems with it. Now, that very much could be just a result of the environment that I was in. We had somewhat newer systems. We had a refresh cycle that was somewhat adhered to, and it actually went through pretty smoothly for me. But that seems like it, from my experiences since then, that seems to be more of an outlier experience than I've seen. Now, you guys are both seeing some challenges with that. Nick, you talked about the boot looping issue, and Pierce, are you seeing that in your environment as well, specifically boot loop, or what other issues are you seeing?
No, not really. I think the biggest concern that we have, I think primarily in biotech, is compatibility. Right. When I did the Windows 7 to 10 upgrade in my last lab environment, the thing that we wanted to focus on the most was basically vendor approval, right? And making sure that they had, validated compatibility with what we wanted to implement. And I think the same thing persists now, right? It requires a measured approach, and I think maybe you did get a little bit lucky, right? But that's not to say that every deployment is going to be hell, right? I think that just means that some environments require more of that attention, right? Especially those with older systems or those with lab environments, right? As you said, lab environment wasn't touched at all, which is great, right? Very, I'd be incredibly thankful, right? So
yeah, absolutely.
But that's kind of where my perspective is the end user machines. It should be staged, right? It should definitely be staged because there's the potential for impact is still high depending on the different business units that might be at play or something like that. And there's not really, unfortunately for the consumer end, there's not really an answer, right? You can't really stage an upgrade on your own machine. You just kind of make backups and go for it, right? But yeah, I think from an enterprise standpoint, and especially from a biotech standpoint, what I'm really concerned about is the lab and its compatibility, because that's just something that's so unknown to us, how the instruments truly do communicate with their controllers and things like that. So yeah, for me, it's mostly about making sure that there's a proper project plan with the right support behind you, right? Basically asking for help from the vendor at every step to make sure that even if something does go wrong, what's our fallback plan, right? Can we re-implement the previous machine? That's kind of where like inline upgrades could make it difficult, because if you run into something like Nick was describing where it's a boot loop or something like that, and the only answer is a reimage, well, you might not have a backup to restore from necessarily, right? Because that there's no fallback, or there could be no fallback, right? Because that machine is you didn't replace it, so you can't just fall back to the previous machine, right? You can't really roll back the update if you can't get into the operating system. So your rollback plan is much more restricted, I think, with the in-place upgrades, and that definitely should be a consideration, especially in more sensitive environments.
Yeah. So we're definitely talking about a lot of some horror stories here and some issues and concerns that we've seen. But on the flip side, the deployment that I had, which was no problem at all. So I think the theme that we're seeing here is make sure that your system or asset refresh cycle is on point, and that you are keeping your systems up to date as well as refreshed in terms of hardware on a regular interval. Make sure that your storage control for endpoints is also working properly, that you're monitoring and managing the levels of storage prior to deploying the patch to these endpoints. And more so than anything else, plan early, get started early. This is a freight train that is coming at us, and we want to be prepared for it so that our endpoints and our environments are not vulnerable come November of this year. Now, this is a great opportunity to also fill in that we are going to be seeing the return of Microsoft Recall. Now, and Nick, I see you flinching. I'm a security guy. I'm flinching as well. And so we saw a Recall, and for those that don't know, Recall is an AI-based snapshot feature of Windows that would essentially take quick snapshots of whatever you're doing, whatever activity that you're performing, and whatever application you're performing it within the system, and it creates a library of actions of different applications used and everything like that, so that you can recall upon those later utilizing AI-based queries and searches. And from a security perspective, and Nick, I know you're going to want to chime in here as well, the big concern is having that library of snapshots that is a guide of everything, or a record of everything that you have essentially done on your system. The level of data that is going to be held in this, anything that you've typed in, anything that you've talked about, anything that you've accessed or looked at or viewed, it's all in this database of snapshots. Now, this was previewed by Microsoft last year, and the immediate response from the security community was, wait, what are you doing? Let's not do this. This does not sound like a good idea. And Microsoft actually took that feedback and delayed the rollout to go and implement some of these security features that were really needed. They've implemented further encryption. They've implemented some more safeguards around it for privacy. The concern is the concern still exists, though. One of the security features that they did integrate with it was also Windows Hello biometric authentication to gain access to the snapshot, which is definitely a good improvement. But I want to hear both of your take on Recall. What do you guys think about it? Do you guys feel on the security side? Will you be using it?
I personally am strongly against it. Not just for security reasons and the potential vulnerability that is exposing and just creating, as you said, a library of essentially everything that's done on that computer. A threat actor is able to access that data. They can figure out anything you've done at any given point in time on that device. But also just for like personal privacy reasons as well. Like, it's there's a debate and there's a certain level of nuance that comes into an enterprise environment, and whether or not anything that you're doing on a work device is essentially your employer is able to be privy to it. There's a discussion to be had there. But even aside from that, I personally think that this Microsoft Recall goes way too far in that regard. It's too invasive. It's recording too much data, and it just is really an invasion of privacy, as well as a large potential security risk. So I am against it. I tell everyone that I can to avoid it, stay away from it, don't implement it in their environments. Yeah.
Yeah, I fully agree. I don't think I think it's an invasion of any kind of privacy, no matter which way you look at it. And I think that's one thing that we are responsible for stewarding, right? Is the privacy of end users and the privacy of ourselves, right? Because if this is implemented on personal machine, if you wouldn't want this implemented on your own machine, right? And I think that's one way that you can look at things like this is, would I use this? And if the answer is no, then you should probably reconsider if it gets deployed in your enterprise environment, right? So And the same goes for you for letting it be implemented on your own machine, right? I'm sure there will be a way to to disable it or remove it. Someone will find one, right? Whether that's built into Windows or not, I'm not sure, right? Whether it's like more of a hacky way or whether it's just a feature. But either way, I don't support the idea of recall. I think it's, yeah, like I said, an invasion of privacy. But I also don't, you know, like Nick said, what if a threat actor gains access to that vault, right? Imagine the wealth of information that they could glean, especially if that machine is an enterprise machine, right? So, like all of a sudden, they know internal addresses of all the resources that somebody might be using. Like they can literally just understand the landscape of your environment through doing nothing else other than compromising this one device. And maybe that device is inconsequential, but I guarantee they still access company resources on it.
Yeah.
So I think that's something to consider when thinking about implementing recall.
No, absolutely. So there are kind of two sides of this coin here when thinking about the risks that are associated with recall. One, which was really the angle that I was initially looking at this from, was the angle from an attacker. A threat actor gains access to a system that utilizes recall, maybe has discovers or determines a way to compromise that data store or gain access to that data store of all of those actions. That is a huge repository of data that a threat actor can then take and review, gather intel, gather as much information as possible, even exfiltrate potentially this data. So there's immediate concern from that perspective of a threat actor actually coming and compromising a system. But then you both kind of touched on as well the privacy aspect of it within an enterprise setting. And that's something that I've read a little bit about online around some concerns on that as well, around organizations implementing this as also a pseudo surveillance tool, potentially with this level of data capture on enterprise assets. What is going to be the visibility into that for administrators? And what does the actual governance of that look like when you have essentially all of these systems in a fleet that have this aggregated data store of all of the actions performed on each endpoint? Like those are databases of actions of company resources, company data, potentially sensitive information. What's the governance look like on that? And what does the overall management administration of these tool sets look like from our view, being in the IT security space, being, you and I, we live primarily in administrative portals at this point with the SaaS solutions that we're working with. What features and options are we going to have through that?
Yeah, it's a good point. I don't know. Don't know. I wish there was more discussion, because one thing Microsoft likes to do is announce new stuff, right? They're big for that, but they don't necessarily talk about how that stuff will be able to be managed. Like they'll touch on it oftentimes, but they don't go into depth. And when you see some of the changes that they make in their administrative portals, I think I understand why, because they probably don't even know. But that's more tongue in cheek. I don't actually think that, but it is something worth considering. Is like no one's discussing the governance side of it right now, right? Other than people who are concerned about it, or concerned about the implementation of it, or wondering how they're going to manage it. Even not even from set concern aside, right? Those that want to implement it, how do you manage it, right? And no Microsoft hasn't released anything that, at least that I've seen, that points to what you will be able to do, as you were saying, Anthony. So I think that's a question that needs to be asked right now. So like what, especially of Microsoft and other people who are implementing similar tools, is like, what does the governance look like? How are you securing the data that you're capturing, right? How long are you retaining it? What are the conditions, right? So
Yeah, exactly. And you had also mentioned turning it off as well. And that is something that we're yet to see, because the initial rollout, the initial thought process around it as well as if you take a look at recall logically, the level of access that it needs, the level of integration with the operating system it needs, because it is working at the OS level. It is not, it is capturing your screen, it is capturing data inputs across applications. And so initially, we weren't sure if there's going to be a way to turn it off, if there's, or if it's going to be so deeply integrated with the system that it's, on by default, essentially. Now, with this latest rollout, it does look like recall is going to go to an opt-in status, which is definitely the right way to go around it. Now we have to see if Microsoft is going to implement the enterprise grade controls to prevent users from opting in themselves, to prevent shadow IT from wanting to explore these new features when the IT department is saying no. And so I think I think this is something that we're going to have to come back to in this podcast as we see recall fully released and fully rolled out. See what kind of administration is going to look like for Windows PCs in the future. The last question that I had on this, though, if for any reason recall was not able to be disabled on an enterprise scale, would that, from an IT security perspective, do you think that that would push any other organizations away from Windows? Now, I can't really imagine that this would be the case. Like, Windows has such a ubiquitous control of enterprise space and enterprise systems. But, and so I can't imagine that Microsoft would release this without a way to administer it or disable it on an enterprise scale. But in this hypothetical, do we see other companies moving to like Linux because of recall? Or Macs?
I don't necessarily think companies are, going to start switching to Ubuntu endpoints or anything like that anytime soon, as much as sometimes maybe I wish they would. But I do think there would absolutely be some sort of chilling effect towards Microsoft. And, maybe they're not transitioning away from Windows machines right away, but maybe, hey, they decide for their next fleet deployment, they're going to look into the pricing for some Macs and see, where they can replace certain endpoints with Macs instead, or maybe some Linux machines, and just starting to kind of maybe diversify away from just pure Windows if they've decided as an organization that what's going on with recall doesn't suit their business needs or it's too invasive. Maybe another concern that I've kind of had with it is, what if it's a company and they're dealing with a lot of very private, sensitive information for either for their company or for third parties, and then you have recall that's just recording all of that and storing it somewhere as well. That becomes another huge compliance and security risk.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point because we're in 2025. CMMC is coming down the pike. It's about to be enforced. And for those that don't know, the cybersecurity maturity model certification, it is the security framework that organizations must adhere to qualify for work with the DoD contracting. It aligns with NIST SP 853, the NIST risk management framework, and it really also focuses on NIST 800 171, which is controlled unclassified information, and managing that. I wonder how recall is going to interact in these CMMC compliant environments that are handling this government data, this classified information or sensitive information, and how that is all going to shake out. Because that's, you could just have a data store on a system that's just full of essentially state secrets at that point.
Exactly.
Well, I think Microsoft may be thinking about this because with the latest re-release, it seems I was doing a little bit of reading because I've realized that I'm not up to date on all the new features, and they have introduced a series of privacy settings that you can filter out, recall from even capturing the data. And reportedly, it uses the same mechanism to recognize sensitive information as Purview does for labeling sensitive information. So I think they are thinking about this and how they're going to be compliant with things like CMMC. At the same time, you may know that Microsoft has a whole separate, Microsoft 365 environment for government and that
GCC.
kind of thing, right? So they may just not introduce the feature entirely, right? They may keep it completely separated.
Yeah.
But I think that's one, it seems like they're aware of the potential privacy concerns and impact to their ability to deploy it in more sensitive environments. And it seems like they're maybe trying to create some avenues to, well, what I will hope will make administering it easier if it does ask to be deployed.
You gotta be careful there, Pierce. Getting a little bit too close to purview, data sensitivity, data labeling. Oh my gosh, data inventorying. Those are scary words to a lot of organizations, though they are so important.
Yeah.
That is exactly what this is going to cause, and it, not alone. I've been seeing across the different companies that I work with the growing importance of data management, data labeling, and also data inventorying. And those are really, they tend to be high resource intensive and high workload projects to actually get a full data management or a data inventory so that you can actually effectively apply labels. And then on top of that, data labeling takes administration and overhead that to just maintain. And so that is a direction that I see everything going. I mean, with AI, AI governance, it is critical that you have labeled data. It is critical that you know where your data lives. Now, all of this is important today. This is always recommended that your organization already have a data inventory, already know what's going on, already label sensitive information. It is just becoming more and more important with the usage of AI, with how recall, with compliance requirements, and the increasing importance of maintaining compliance for just standard business operations. Now, on that point of AI, I wanted to move us over to a topic that I'm really interested to hear your guys' take on, which is agentic AI. Agentic AI is a type of artificial intelligence that can act independently to achieve goals. It's designed to learn and adapt over time and to work with humans to solve problems. Now, to a non-technical listener, that might sound really good. That sounds interesting. Like an AI that can act independently, that can work towards achieving goals. What that really, you distill it down to is making decisions. You're getting AI that can make decisions and that can act upon those decisions. Now, to the techies listening, and I know to you, Pierce and Nick, that sounds like write permissions for AI. And I don't know about you guys. I want to hear what you guys think, but that's a little scary. That's a little scary on my end. What do you guys think?
Yeah, I agree. It's also scary. I don't know. Maybe I'm on the more old-fashioned end of it. I much prefer AI that will, make the decisions and come to conclusions and then present those conclusions to me so that I can then determine for myself and for the organization if that is in fact the correct course of action and how we want to proceed, versus having it make the decision and then execute that decision immediately without any sort of controls, any kind of, fire blocks, essentially, that might stop it from doing something disastrous for the organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Pierce.
Sorry. I was just going to say that I agree that I don't know if I trust AI at any point, right, to make the actual decision, right? A big thing that I think is a benefit of AI is that you can get a lot of information very quickly and then make a decision based on the aggregate information, right? Like, it's a really good data gathering tool. But I don't know if that makes it a good, like hall monitor, right? Like I would rather have things like, if like from a security standpoint, if you think about identity, right? I think about how agentic AI could be used to action security alerts on endpoints or accounts, right? Because that's where I kind of see maybe the best use case potentially for it, right? Because that's where humans may not be able to respond quick enough. Maybe we're not awake. Maybe we didn't see the alert. Maybe, whatever it may be. But at the same time, we already have things, and maybe Microsoft is using AI to detect, risky properties of user sign-ins or endpoint activities, but maybe they're not. I'm not sure. And but I know they'd use a lot of other things to help classify whether a sign-in is risky or not, right? Not AI, just data aggregation. And I think that with the tools we have through conditional access or other, other things like that, where we can block user sign-in based on risk status, I think those are currently sufficient until a human can action it, right?
Mhm.
I still think that at the end of the day, the person should be the one making the decision, because we are the ones that have the context, right? I feel like in my opinion, part of the challenge with AI is that you can't always give it context. And that's where I feel like decision making will fail, is through a lack of context. So yeah, that's kind of
Yeah,
my take on it.
no, that's interesting, and I think that rings true. Is how can you give these agentic AI models enough context or enough information to have a reasonable degree of confidence that the decisions that they're making are accurate, or that they're correct? Now,
How do you know they're thinking like a human?
exactly, right? Well, and that's always been one of the concerning areas of AI, as we've seen generative AI continue to improve, is once the AI model really gets going to some degree, it's a black box. We're not 100% certain, once it starts learning on itself, once it starts developing on itself, if what it is thinking about, what its consciousness is entailing. Now, some AI models have started to try to lean a little bit more in this direction, where they're actually giving you the thought process, and reading out the thought process. But how do we even get there? How does that initiate? And that is something that I think would need that thought process readout while the AI is actually working. That's something that's going to be critical to having in an agentic AI system. And yeah, you're exactly right. We're going to need humans that are monitoring. This is where AI governance comes in. This is where we can go back to our data labeling goes in. But also, this is also where AI is going to come into play to help with things. I can see some really good beneficial use cases from this, but also starts to lean towards we're starting to move in that direction where AI is doing more and more. It's making more decisions. It's taking more actions. Where is the point that how can we maintain control? And two, is there a level in which we lose that control? Like right now, we have a good bit of control over decisions that are made, but at the same time, we also already have some instances of machine learning or AI models, you could say, that are helping in our security tool sets. Just like you were referencing, Pierce, we have automated response in security tool sets. Endpoint detection and response tool sets often have automated response scenarios. Some of those are going to be pre-configured, or they're going to be playbooks that are developed by the security team of an enterprise. Some of them are going to be out of the box, canned actions or automated actions that'll be performed when a certain number of criteria align. Now, that is, I think, the precursor, the pre-stage for where we're really headed towards with agentic AI, which is less around the criteria necessarily, where it's not looking for a set number of, if this hits and this is in this status and this setting, okay, do this, which is more direct automation. but it's now pulling in all of this intelligence, pulling in all of this information on its own. It is deciphering what is going on and then deciding what the best course of action is to take off of that information that it's gathered. And so I think that we are going to see this heavily hit. I mean, we're already seeing it heavily hit security solutions. I mean, I've gone to a few conferences recently where, I mean, you can't go 5 steps without hearing AI or some sort of AI discussion. And that's why, this podcast is going to be no different. It's the talk of the town. We have to address it. And as we are monitoring this agentic AI and scenario, or this agentic AI technology that's really evolving, it leads us to another question that really was brought about. I think DeepSeek definitely played a role in this, but it was talking about self-hosted generative AI, open source versus closed source. Pierce, you had some thoughts on this one. I wanted to get your take.
Yeah, definitely. My biggest question, I think, with the dawn of self-hosted LLMs and other generative AI solutions is, what are the advancements that are made by private AI companies going to carry over to the open source field, or will open source drive further advancement in this area that then enterprise will pick up on? And I guess so. The question is, who's going to be driving the advancement, and either way, are we going to see it trickle over to the other side, right? Because one thing that I might be a little bit concerned about is the commercialization of these solutions, right? With exclusive commercialization of these solutions, I should say, because I think we've seen it with some things already, right? I think like Windows is definitely commercialized, right? And that's something that we all either use Windows or use a Unix-based solution, right, as your operating system. Those are your options. And like we've already seen Microsoft kind of commercialize something that has another open source alternative, right? And we're seeing that with AI now. So I guess my question is, are the advancements that we see, like the jump from GPT 3.5 to 4, or if there was to be a GPT 5, so to speak, right? Would we see those similar advancements carry over to the open source field or not? And I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts on that.
Yeah, the way I kind of view all of that is whoever has access to the data is going to be the driver of innovation in the AI space. So whether it is, enterprise companies that are able to throw a bunch of money around and get themselves access to as much data as possible so they can continue developing their models, or if we're going to see a sort of open source movement to aggregate as much data as possible and feed it into a new potential open source solution that might be able to rival some of these enterprise solutions. Because as of right now, in the current landscape, it really is whoever has the most money and can throw the most money at getting data into their model is going to have the best model. And I don't personally see that changing anytime soon. So I think we can probably pretty safely expect that it's going to continue to be driven by these enterprise for-profit corporations, and I am hoping that the open source solutions will be able to, keep up, but I don't necessarily expect them to be the ones as the driving force.
Sure. Do you think that, I think it's a really good point that you made about the money, because the other thing is, like, you need the compute to even do it, right? To even generate the data and to analyze the data that you have, right? So that's a really good point. But do you feel like the advancements that are driven by corporations will either end up carrying over or somehow, osmosis their way into the open source community, or not?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and I think that we're seeing these large models really developed by these enterprises, like you said, these for-profit corporations, and they are these massive multi-million dollar data sets, essentially, that are being developed into these models. And then you see something like DeepSeek. Now, from a security perspective, DeepSeek's terrifying. I mean, just give your data to China. That's fine. But it did introduce a lot of interesting questions or interesting thoughts of like they were able to build a pretty sophisticated and model. Granted, it's got its issues, but they were able to develop a pretty sophisticated model at a tenth of the cost of some of OpenAI's models, and they did it open source. And so I think you guys are right here that it's the dollars and the money that you can inject into it for the compute to actually develop these models. That is going to be a barrier to entry. I think that is going to be a prohibitive factor in this. But at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if we see more of this osmosis, because I mean, I had heard that a lot of DeepSeek training included some of ChatGPT, and so that just goes to show you that some of these models are being trained with other models, and that might represent some osmosis. Now, whether it's legal or not, that is to be seen. I think that there's a lot of legal concepts that are being created by AI, and we need to see as they develop into actual legislation and actual law. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see that osmosis continue, and even if these private models, even these corporate LLMs that are being developed by these AI companies, continue to lead the pack, I wouldn't be surprised to see open source quickly following them, because there is going to be a number of use cases and a lot of organizations that are driving for these implementing AI, utilizing AI to increase their productivity, that may also not want to, that may want to develop it in-house, that may want to have their own LLM that they can utilize within the organization that mitigates some of the security concerns that we have with these SaaS-based or commercialized LLMs.
That's actually really interesting. You bring up like an internal enterprise LLM or generative AI solution, because we explored that for a client who really wanted a way to write their deliverables to their customers with AI. Right? They've seen the hype. They talked to a few companies that said they could do it. Right? And that was something we explored, was developing an internal LLM or combination. I don't think an LLM would really have been the right use case for them, because they needed a little bit more than that.
Mm-hmm.
They needed a report builder LLM, basically, right? And it, at the time, this was a year and a half ago at this point, so things were at a good place, but as far as the advancements that have been made, but still not quite where they are today, and where I think we will be going.
Mm-hmm.
But at that time, it wasn't the right solution, but we pretty in-depth explored what it would look like to build an internal library for whatever implementation we went with. And that was a really interesting concept. I think we will see more of that in enterprise. I think we're already seeing some of it, right? But I think we'll continue to see more, like, basically open source models trained on internal data and hosted internally for internal use. So,
yeah. And even building on that, one thing that I've kind of just daydreamed about, I guess you could say, recently is sort of, looking to the future. Are we going to see companies starting to essentially retain their own large stores of data and basically an entire vault of company data, company actions, how things are done there, so that they can just take in a new AI model and have all of this data already available to instantly train it and then start using it for their purposes. So I think that we are going to start seeing some of that happening, where companies are going to, let's say, maybe start recording all of the data and storing it somewhere for a number of years, and then taking that data and just feeding it into their own essentially bespoke LLM, like you were saying. And now they have an LLM they just brought in that already has 5 years worth of organizational history and data, and it knows exactly how they do things there. And so I think that I'm personally, I'm expecting to see something along those lines starting to happen within the next few years.
Yeah, well, and that's really where we get to kind of the middle road here, which is the implementation or the development of these models for enterprises, individual to those enterprises. But really, what those are, if the enterprise isn't looking to actually develop their own model, is a something like Azure AI or another model that is available from these commercialized entities that are producing these LLMs. Then they pull those internal and train that model on their organizational data. And so in that way, they are both using that commercialization, but still making it more of a bespoke or self-hosted solution. Now, obviously, with Azure AI, kind of self-hosted, kind of not. Like, yes, you can self-host it internally, but it's within your cloud environment and it's utilizing Microsoft's model. But it by utilizing some of those tool sets, it's kind of that middle ground where you're still directly utilizing that commercialized model, but you're turning it into this bespoke model just for your organization. And that's where I see a lot of the market really going for this, because that removes the direct need for an organization to purchase some of these really high-end NVIDIA chipsets and cards for AI cards for actually developing these models. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this all evolves. I think from a security perspective, self-hosting an LLM is the best solution that you have. But also the benefits of going with an organization that has shoveled money into building out their models, something like an OpenAI that has just dumped millions of dollars into their models. There's something to be said about the efficacy of those models and how well they will be developed compared to some of these other open source models that may not have the same resources.
Definitely.
Now, we have been talking for the last hour here, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. I am really looking forward to our next segment. We are going to go ahead and dive into some IT and cybersecurity career items. So this is just a portion of the conversation where we can share a little bit of our stories, and we're going to talk about a couple topics here and our takes on it around the IT and cybersecurity career fields. This, we have been in the field. Pierce and I have been in the field for several years now, and Nick is also making his way through this field currently, having a few years of experience in IT and working his way into cyber. So we all have slightly different perspectives that we're going to be able to come from here. And hopefully some of this information is valuable to any listener that is working on getting into the field or working their way through the field. Where I really wanted to kick this off today, and it's always a topic of discussion. We're probably going to talk about it multiple times throughout the podcast, throughout future episodes as well, because it's not a topic that goes away. It's degree versus certification versus experience. And this is for IT and in cyber. We're going to kind of talk about both. But where do you guys rank degrees, certification, and experience in terms of importance and impact on navigating your way through the IT and cyber career fields?
All right. Well, I mean, personally, as the least experienced person here of the three of us, what I've kind of noticed and seems to be the case at least is obviously experience is ranked the highest. That's the most important thing anyone's going to be looking at, is just simply how much time you've spent doing what it is that you do. And then as far as certain education goes, that I feel like it kind of comes down more to either the personal, preference or rankings of the actual hiring manager, whoever is looking for the job, or perhaps the organization as a whole. An organization might decide that they put a lot of importance on technical degrees and they only want to hire people that have technical degrees. Or maybe they decide the opposite and they're like, hey, no, if someone has, been doing this for several years already, they've got relevant certifications, that's good enough for us. And I've, throughout my career, I've seen a wide range of all of that. And I'm also coming at this, from the perspective of someone who doesn't have a technical degree. I didn't go to school for IT or anything like that. I completely changed careers and career paths a few years ago. And so now I'm, essentially started as like a fresh out of high school non-college grad with just a couple certifications and a little bit of background education, and like that was kind of it. So I'm I'm still exploring my way through that. Ideally I want the emphasis to be more on certifications and experience than degree, obviously, but that is kind of more just my own personal biased standpoint.
No, it's totally understandable. Well, and you're navigating it, yourself right now. Thanks for kind of giving some context around the position that you're in. Now, Pierce,
Yes, sir.
you've been in the industry a little bit longer. Where are you landing on this?
Well, I think it really depends on the position that you're trying to fill, right? Or the role that you're trying to step into from the person that the person that's seeking the job's perspective, right? As a hiring manager, I can tell you that, especially for engineering roles, experience and certifications are absolutely king. I think the new style of certifications where it's much more focused content and if you're certified in like if you have AZ 104, for example, right? I have a
Which
pretty
is
good
the
understanding.
Azure Administrator certification.
The Azure Administrator Associate certification, correct. I have a pretty good understanding of where your skills lie within Azure, right? Specifically, if you're using that as a reference to tell me if you're not tacking on any additional, information to that. As a hiring manager, that gives me a pretty good understanding of where you should have experience in Azure, and I can target those questions in an interview, right? So I think certifications are carrying a lot of weight right now. But experience, it also from a hiring manager's perspective, it matters a lot, right? Like I want to know what environments you've been in and what you have experience with, what technology you've worked with. And if you haven't been in an environment that enables you to learn that technology, how have you been exploring it outside of that, right? So, and that's all experience in my book, right? So I think from an applicant's perspective, both of those things are the easiest to get, right? Certifications are definitely easier than years of experience to build, but you should be figuring out ways to build that experience at the same time. For what I've personally come across is that for management roles, a degree seems preferred, but recently it seems like there's been an uptick in preference for technical managers. And it seems like maybe the degree is kind of being overlooked in some of those cases because many technical managers, myself included, don't have a traditional degree in business management and in anything technical, anything like that, right? Some may or may have gone, either they went to school first or a lot of people go back, right? But I'm definitely seeing it become a little bit more common where a technical manager is asked for, and if you meet the criteria for the amount of technical they're looking for, then maybe the degree isn't counted as heavily. So I think in IT, traditionally, we seem to always have been that way. But maybe for those entry and mid-level manager roles, it's becoming a little bit less degree focused now that people realize that, or higher management realizes that technical managers know how to manage technical people, right? So I think that's playing a lot. The evolution of what we're realizing works best, especially in large enterprises with big tech stacks, is changing. So I think it's becoming less degree focused over time, but it's not to say that a degree couldn't help, right? Because I think it can, and I think in the right context, a lot of things about IT haven't changed, right? The technology has changed, and a lot of approaches have, right? Best practices have changed, and security standards have changed, but the basis for the technology is similar. Networking hasn't changed in like 2 decades. So, you know, that's kind of what I think of. So I do think a degree could be really valuable, especially if it's focused, if it's technically focused, right?
Yeah.
Or if you plan to get that technical knowledge some other way through certifications or through home labbing or through just straight up experience.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, I'm right there with you guys. I'm experience. That's always going to be number one. Just having experience that demonstrates that you actually know how to do the job. Certifications I rank next. The certifications, when they are not, I would say, easier. They're easier to get overall than you going to a 4-year college. But the benefit that they bring, even with being easier to get, is the accuracy of the information and the targeted nature of the information. So certifications primarily run by certifying bodies where their whole business, their whole focus is on these certifications. They are updated really regularly. And so they're updated with the new pieces. Like, and Pierce, you were saying like a lot of IT and cyber or networking, a lot of the basic concepts, they stay the same. And I do agree with you there, but I think that the technology that goes with them evolves really quickly. And so
Absolutely.
understanding the concepts is important and it's really beneficial, but the certifications show you applying those concepts, or they show you that you know how to apply those concepts in a certain technology or a specific vendor, things like that.
Absolutely.
Now, the degree side of things, I think because we are in this spot where technology evolves so quickly, what I really see pulling out of a degree, and I'm a hiring manager too, and you know, I've definitely interviewed several different scenarios with different degrees, certifications, and experience. What I've seen primarily come out of a degree is capability to communicate is definitely there because of a lot of the writing and that goes into building the degree, and then you're pulling out, you know, some of the concepts, the foundational ideas and structures of networking, of IT. But the gap that remains is that application. So from my experience, when I was going to college, I was also working in IT at this point, and I was going from working at an e-commerce company where we were a full Windows 10 environment, fully advanced. And this was pretty early into the Windows 7 to Windows 10 transition. But then I would go to class at night for computer information systems, and we'd be working on Vista. We'd be working on building, taking apart, putting back together these Windows Vista, XP, Windows 7 systems sometimes. But it was emblematic of the main challenge that a lot of these schools and universities have to face, which is how to evolve the technology that they are teaching at pace with technology. And that is a really fast pace. So that was where I really made the decision that focusing on experience and my certifications and was going to be the best route for me, really associating it to the cost of college nowadays as well. At this point, I'm not fully convinced that if you are wanting to go into IT, you are wanting to go into cyber, that it is worth 50, 60, 70K in debt for a degree. I don't know if that degree is going to return you 50, 60, 70K.
That's fair. That's definitely fair.
And so that's where I'm kind of landing with this. And the challenge here, and I'm going to kind of pivot this over to cyber on this from this perspective. What I've seen a lot, and I've been doing a lot of work in the cyber community recently, is that there is this prevailing notion for these soon-to-be or recent graduates, the aspiring practitioners, the aspiring cybersecurity practitioners, that when they leave college, or they graduate and they get their degree. Maybe they have their Security Plus certification or something like that, but they have this expectation that the job market for cybersecurity is well tailored to what they have currently, a degree and maybe a cert. And that's a fundamental challenge that we're facing right now. And I think it is not what we should be communicating to these soon-to-be grads or college students as they're working towards their cybersecurity degree. Because at the end of the day, and I want to hear your guys' take on this, but getting into cyber is not as easy as I feel a lot of these soon-to-be grads, recent grads are thinking it is. And I think that my perspective on this is getting into cyber requires IT. You know, a quote that I heard, and I don't claim this, but I aligned with it, was if you haven't managed an enterprise environment, how can I trust you to protect mine? Definitely. So I want to get your take on that in the cyber area. Do you guys think that IT experience really should be required? Do you think that it shouldn't be, or that the barriers should be lowered? Where do you guys land on this?
Well, I feel like Nick may have a direct knowledge and ability to speak to it. So I will, I'll jump in and just give my quick perspective before, we get the legitimate experience from somebody who's kind of gone through it. Right. And that's, I agree with you. I think that it's almost a prerequisite in many cases. I think that it is possible to be like a cybersecurity analyst or a security engineer without having done infrastructure work, but I think it's much, much harder. I think it's not necessarily, and I think it's the fault of both the industry and the cyber boom, right? Which maybe there was a gap in jobs that we needed to fill, and maybe some of those should have looked more internally to pull people that had infrastructure experience already. But either way, there was a large increase in the amount of available positions, and naturally, people without infrastructure experience are going to fill those, right, when there's a need. But I think that mentality of, oh, we still need a bunch of people in cyber is still prevailing, right? It's a prevailing sentiment. But there are a lot of both all infrastructure people that are trying to get into cyber and people outside of the industry that are also trying to get into cyber. And those are, I think the infrastructure folks already have some of that experience that makes it easier to jump in. So that's where maybe where the communication breakdown is in the expectation is that it's way easier to do it if you already kind of understand an infrastructure and you've managed an infrastructure. But I think maybe that's the part that the quiet part, right, doesn't get said out loud too much. So
yeah, I think it does. Is the knowledge you gain from managing an enterprise environment it really plays a role into becoming a very effective security practitioner or security analyst. And I think that the other side of it, and you kind of mentioned it as well, is it's the way that we're communicating to these recent and soon-to-be grads, but it's also the way that the industry is communicating some of these roles. They're communicating them as entry level, but then they're still requiring 2 to 5 years of IT experience. And I think it's a fundamental miscommunication on that point of it's not entry level as in the entry level that we normally think about. It is entry level to the cyber field, which has its qualifications that require some experience. Now, I don't think that that's survivable. I don't think that that is a viable long-term strategy because you can't run with different understandings of different entry level. And I really find myself in a spot where I just don't think cybersecurity itself as a field is an entry level field. It is more in my mind a pivot or a specialization off of IT once you've worked in IT. Now, I wanted to get...
It is a subset of IT, right?
Exactly. It is the security of information systems. And IT is management of information systems. So I wanted to get that in before I sent it over to Nick, because I know that this is a topic that directly applies to Nick, and we're going to have a good conversation here. So go for it.
Yeah. I mean, this is definitely something I can talk about at length due to my personal experience because, like I said, earlier, I switched careers and I did end up doing one of those security boot camp type programs. It was about 6 months. Um, and as far as the quality and the content of education itself, it was fantastic. I learned a lot. I developed many new skills. I learned how to code. I learned how to, analyze and protect these systems. But at the same time, like you both have kind of been saying, throughout that whole process, we were being sort of breadcrumbed this, oh, there's so many entry level cybersecurity jobs available. Oh, we'll help you get something after you graduate. This and that. And then, come graduation, and I'm looking at these jobs and these postings, and yeah, a lot of it is saying, oh, you know, entry level security analyst, you need 3 years of experience working with whatever, systems, these SIEM tools, all of this stuff. You need experience. A lot of them even require previous experience as a security analyst already. And so that is kind of how I found myself in my current IT position is I am working to build that experience because yeah, it's from everything that I've seen and experienced, exactly like you said, Anthony, cybersecurity is not an entry level field. You can't just finish school or walk into an office and start doing cybersecurity. You need to understand how the systems work before you know how to secure them. You need to understand networking. You need to understand the infrastructure. You need to understand applications and code, how they all work, so that what vectors, what TTPs are being used to attack these and how to protect them. Because obviously, if you don't understand how something's works, you can't fix it, you can't protect it.
Exactly. And it goes even so much further than that in context based. If you don't understand how elements of the enterprise environment operate together, how they link together, how they can communicate, how the infrastructure looks, how do you know that you've effectively contained an incident? How do you know that the changes or the implementations that you made are actually effective and holistic enough to actually provide the level of protection that you're looking for? And so that you also brought up a great point there that I wanted to hit, which was boot camps. Now, boot camps are a long four-lettered word in the industry a lot of the time, and there are definitely different levels of boot camps that you can go to. You have some that are a 4-week boot camp, you have the 6-week boot camps, and then you have the longer, more intensive ones like you went to, Nick, which are the 6 months boot camps. Now, I've gotten the opportunity to talk to you about the boot camp that you went to, Nick, and see kind of some of the stuff that you were going through, some of the material you were learning, and I was honestly impressed because up until then I was very much in the camp of, oh, boot camp, yikes, that's not really going to get you what you need, and that understanding was off of the historical place that a lot of these boot camps have sat, which has really not prepared people effectively or aspiring practitioners effectively to really dive into the market. And but seeing the one that you went to and the 6 month of the longer tenure, the focus that it had on it, that was really encouraging to see that these boot camps are evolving and they are actually bringing more and more value. And I think through that you also got a cert, right?
I most of the way. That boot camp got me, I would say, probably 75% of the way towards my security plus, and then I just did a little self-studying, maybe another 10 to 20 hours of self-study, and then took the exam and passed it.
Nice. And so that there was some added benefit there as well, because not only were you getting some education in it, but also some codification of that education through the security plus, through the certification.
Exactly.
So Nick, you talked about how in your experience, this is definitely not an entry level field. But what's your take on it? Do you feel like you agree that we should have the IT requirements prior to a cyber job for someone in your position?
I do think so. I think that for, for the quote unquote entry level analyst positions, yeah, there should be some sort of IT foundational knowledge that you have, or perhaps, maybe with an advanced degree, like something post grad, that might be enough to get you to the point where yes, you can just walk right in the door and have the tools to start, doing proper analyst duties. But it's yeah, there's like you said, there's a gap in between where a lot of people are exiting school and or like exiting these boot camps and the level of skills and knowledge that you need to have to actually be an effective security practitioner.
Okay, yeah, you hit two things there that I want to touch on. One, I want to call attention that you were talking about a more advanced degree, so we're talking like a master's degree here.
Yeah.
To get into these entry level roles in cyber, if without experience or without some of that. So just keep that in mind if you're listening to this and you're like thinking wanting to get into IT and you have a degree. Where we're talking about from seeing and being in the industry is if you want to go in without experience, you have to have a master's to get that entry level job. Now talk about debt that you're in for a master's degree to then get a cyber analyst job, which granted cyber analyst jobs, pay a little bit more than IT jobs or the earlier IT jobs. You're probably looking at the 70 to 80K range out of the gate, but 70 to 80K when you're looking at a master's degree worth of debt, that's a little concerning. So that's why it's so important to supplement anything that you're doing with other elements that could level you up in getting the certifications, getting some experience, getting into IT. That is still important, even if you have a degree. Now, the other piece that you had hit on, which was the gap. Now, a lot of people call this a labor gap, and that's kind of what it's always called when you read articles. There's a labor gap or a talent shortage. That's really more what I align with. It's a talent shortage or a talent gap. And that is the bodies are there. The humans are there. The talent isn't, or that experience, the level at which they need to be, or at least what us as hiring managers are looking for isn't. So there's a huge pool of people that are all applying to these jobs that when they get into these interviews and we're having these initial conversations, we just determine and find out that they don't have a lot of that technical experience, or they just don't have technical knowledge that would really be required to be successful in the role. And the question that I had around that is at what spot in experience does the organization take responsibility for training? So if I were to come into a new role as, say, I'm a green cybersecurity analyst. Now, if I come in with some IT experience, I have some systems experience. Now, my company is going to then train me and build me up in security on the security analyst side of things, building on that built experience. Is there a case to be made in terms of lowering the bar to enter cyber that the company would be required, or not required, but like the company would take on the responsibility of training not just the security experience, but also going a little bit further back and starting to train that technical experience? Like if I'm going to hire on someone green to be a security analyst, I want to generally, and this is my opinion, this is my take on this, is I'm going to want to hire someone on that has the foundational skill set, so then I can start developing and training security on top of that. As a business decision, I don't know if it's the right call to pull in someone that is so green that they don't have that technical foundation, and then I have to spend the first 3 to 6 months of their employment with me training just the technical side, before we can even really get to some of the more advanced security. What do you guys think?
You want to go ahead? Yeah. So, I mean, I think that there is absolutely some level of baseline that like you should have or be expected to have if you're trying to get into these roles. Like you can't just walk in off the street, not knowing how to use a computer. Let's say you're proficient with Microsoft Office and that is like the extent of your technical capabilities. You can't expect yourself to be able to perform well in a security position. Like you need to have some understanding, but I think that yes, there should also be, some expectation on the side of the employer that like yes, they are going to train you, and especially when it comes to, their company specific technology stack and what they're using, because you're for the most part you're never going to go to two different companies and have the exact same environment. There's always going to be different services, different devices, different infrastructure just across the companies, and so I think that a lot of the training in a new role should be related to getting you acclimated and familiar with the specific stack that you're going to be working with in that environment. So you should have, at least a broad overview of how, certain components might work together within an environment, just a hypothetical one, but you shouldn't also be expected to, have many years of experience with one specific IDS tool or with a specific SIEM tool to go in at an entry level role. Now, granted, for engineer, architect, higher level positions, yeah, it makes sense that you might want someone who has 5 to 7 years of experience working with Qualys, because that's what you're looking for is a Qualys engineer, and you need someone to do that very specific role. But for the the lower level, more broad roles, I don't think it makes sense to require as specific of certain technologies as some companies might.
So more of a generalist, like you should have a generalist IT foundation, technology foundation, and then
exactly.
that really targeted training is what the company takes on the responsibility for to train you on that. Okay.
Well, I think that really aligns with what like general IT help desk or infrastructure work looks like prior to making the jump, right? So that that makes sense. Many IT folks are generalists because they've out of necessity or out of because that's what is most comfortable or for a variety of reasons, right? But I would say that you kind of have to be if you transition environments, you learn a bunch of different technologies, you learn a bunch of different implementation strategies and different different environments in general. So I think that what Nick said about an analyst kind of expecting to be a generalist or the hiring managers expecting them to be a generalist with some training on then their tool set and what they're expecting a little bit further. I think that aligns very well with IT as a stepping stone into cybersecurity. So
yep, yeah, definitely seems like where we're landing. So we got one more topic for today that we're gonna be going through to wrap this up, and it's one that is near and dear to my heart, and I know it's near and dear to your heart, Pierce. The making mistakes in IT. I could go on and on and on about the mistakes that I've made in IT. It is one of the things that I like the most about the IT industry, pretty specifically, is the general approach to mistakes in the IT industry, at least in my experience, has been very good. Like, mistakes are seen as the way that you learn. I can't tell you the number of times I've taken down an infrastructure, all different, scenarios. I'm learning from these mistakes, but they happen. And they are some of the most powerful tools that you will get in your career for learning. I don't think that there's going to be a ton of disagreement on this one. So maybe tell us a story of one of the mistakes that you guys have made, and what you learned from it, maybe some of the reaction and how it was received also by your leadership, and how that all played out.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely start from a technical perspective. There are several mistakes that I've made from just a planning perspective. There are several mistakes that I've made that have significantly impacted either the status of the project or, like you said, brought the infrastructure down inadvertently. Um, and one that I think is a good blend of technical and planning is I did a SharePoint cutover for a very large file repository, like 4 terabytes, to the same, all to one SharePoint site, which is not a good idea. I don't recommend doing that, by the way. Just for anyone who might be wondering if they should do that, don't do that. At least not without the right context. And so I, did the work to migrate the data load and set up the permissions, did like pre-configuration for everybody. And I was doing some testing before I performed before I called the cutover good, and I realized that I did not do enough sandboxing in that moment. But pretty much right before I sent the email that said, "Yep, all the work is done. Please expect to use the new system on Monday." I knew that it wasn't going to work, and instead of eating my pride and just rolling it back and explaining the situation, I rolled it out anyway, and it caused a pretty significant business impact. We were able to resolve it within 2 days. We rolled back to the previous solution and were able to restore the file data, things like that. But um, at this, what I learned in that situation was more about test how important the sandboxing and testing phase is, right? I didn't leave myself enough room to make sure to validate, right, and make sure that the solution was working correctly. I mean, that's one thing that I I hold very closely to me now, partially because of that, but partially because I know it's the right thing. Is how are you making sure that the solution that you're trying to implement is the right solution and isn't has the effect that you want, right? What testing are you doing? What validation are you doing? Who are you consulting to make those decisions, right?
Yeah.
And that's kind of where I wanted to take this part of the discussion, was that, like, it's okay to make mistakes, but you have to make them in the right context, right? Like, that
Hmm.
was probably, I got a lot of egg on my face, and, like, thankfully it didn't really matter in the scope of the perspective of the department in this instance, right? Like, we weren't negatively impacted by my mistake there, but we very easily could have been. So it's important to be able to make mistakes in the right spot. If I had realized where we were because I tested more, it would have been much more beneficial to the company for me to recognize that beforehand and make the call, hey, we're not going to move forward with this, right? So that's kind of where I see, how are you testing your implementations? Where are you testing them, right? Give yourself the room to make the mistake in the right place. Because if you make it in the wrong place, it could be super detrimental to the business. And in some roles, like I was in a management role at that time, it's really not the right place to be making that mistake, right? So that's kind of where that's my suggestion, and I'm curious what you guys think as well. Is, what do you think the best place to make a mistake is?
Yeah, no, and you bring up some really interesting points of, like, there's context around mistakes as well. The making a mistake when you're in a help desk role or even a sysadmin role is one thing. Making a mistake at a higher level is a completely another thing, because while you're still allowed and expected to make mistakes, the mistakes that you are expected to make are at a different level, essentially, and you're not really expected to make mistakes at these lower levels anymore once you've hit management and you're at that kind of level. Now, what
Right,
you were talking,
like an implementation, like a, hey, this solution's not going to work, we shouldn't finish rolling it out kind of mistake. Yeah, that's not a management level mistake, right?
yep,
Like,
yep, exactly.
probably should have learned that one a little bit earlier, but that's okay.
Well,
We live and we
well,
learn.
exactly. We live and we learn, and it was the main lesson that you learned there was due diligence, additional testing, also pulling the trigger a little bit earlier on reverting back to the prior solution. I think another piece there that you kind of implied, but you also, I also know you, and I know that this is how you kind of approach it. I know that you also owned up to it. I know that you also took accountability for it. And that's another
100%.
big piece that I want to really impart on whoever may be listening to this is you're going to make mistakes. The cover up is always worse than the crime. Own your mistakes, learn from them, talk about what you're learning from them, and just make sure that you actually do learn from them and don't make them a second time. Something I tell my employees all the time is you can make every mistake in the book once. I know you've heard that from me a couple times at this point, Pierce, but that is really where I come from is make all the mistakes that you can, but learn from every single one of them. At the end of the day, once you've spent some time in IT making those mistakes, all of a sudden you're a really experienced IT practitioner because you've stepped on, you've tripped over yourself in those moments. You've had some of those challenges, and the best way to achieve that and to hit that is if you are also owning those mistakes when they come up. That's how you maintain your reputation. That's how you maintain that the view and that your job really. Because if you try to cover something up, again, cover up's worse than crime. That's when you get in trouble. That's when there's disciplinary action. That's when you can get fired.
And in my opinion, that's also the best way to learn, right? If you don't own up to it and say, yes, I did that. Yes, I made that mistake, right? You might know it in the back of your head, but how much are you going to apply that in the future, right? Whereas if you own up to it and you shove the own mistake down your throat and you're like, yes, I did that. Yes, that was my mistake. This is how we're going to do it better next time. That is how you're going to do it better next time, right? Because you had the chance to have that debrief conversation, right? And really have the learning from it. So,
And I think
you gotta admit them.
There's a certain level of kind of that feeling of guilt and shame that you feel after messing something up pretty badly that really does just hammer home that memory in your head of specifically what went wrong, and you're never going to make that same mistake again because you remember exactly how it felt to have to fess up to making that mistake and what the fallout of it was. And our primitive monkey brains, they don't want to feel like that. They're going to do whatever they can to avoid having to feel like that again.
Yeah.
And so that just even further ties into how making mistakes is a very important way to continue building your skills, building your knowledge in IT specifically.
Yeah, and exactly to that point, I still clearly remember one time I had to update some switches. Didn't realize in the moment that these switches were the primary switch stack between a host and a SAN. So the host had all of these virtual machines on them connected to their actual drives, the virtual drives on the SAN. I update the switches, infrastructure goes down, all of it. And that was when I realized, oh no, that's what I just did. I just disconnected the virtual machines from their storage. In this particular case, I was working with a Nimble, and it's an HP SAN. I'm troubleshooting it. I'm trying to get these drives reconnected, and I'm freaking out. I'm not sure how to get them reconnected. So I'm absolutely going to own the mistake. Luckily, I did this. It was in a maintenance window after hours, so the impact was pretty minimal. But at the same time, my client's infrastructure was gone. I had no idea what the recovery was going to look like. I escalated. I called in a more advanced engineer than I, and he hopped in to help me troubleshoot it. Now, this engineer was also a good friend of mine, and he wanted to make sure that I learned the lesson. So he let me just troubleshoot, struggled my way through it a little bit there. before, letting me know how to fix the problem, essentially. Learned a lot about nimbles. And in that scenario, I also learned that you need to restart the SAN, and that a nimble doesn't have a restart option except through CLI. And so that was, I think, 6 years ago, and I still remember it vividly. I will never make that mistake again, and I have not made that mistake again since. So that just highlights kind of what Nick was saying there, of like, that feeling doesn't go away. When you make a mistake, especially when you should own it and you're going through the remediation of it, that sticks with you. And it should, because that's how you learn, and that's how you make sure that these mistakes aren't repeated. Now that's going to be all the time that we have for this episode. Thank you to all of those of you that chimed in to listen today. And yeah, I hope that you guys have a great rest of your week, and we'll be back next week with our next episodes. Thank you very much, Pierce and Nick, for coming on the show this week.
Of course, thank you for having us on.
Yeah, thank you very much.